It's all good.
Mm-hmm.
Leave.
All right. Don't leave.
Don't do this to me.
Oh, no.
All right, here we go. Let me just mute that. And we should be good to go.
Hey.
Cool.
Exciting.
Okay, so thank you everybody for joining me here. My name is Courtney. This is my channel, Opus Eleni. I am really into medieval and early period costuming, and I wanted to host a panel this year since I didn't last year, and kind of get a bunch of different people from a bunch of different backgrounds to sit with me and just kind of talk about our experiences. So I figure we can go around and sort of introduce ourselves first, and then kind of get into some of the questions that I have, and then we'll see if there are any questions from people who happen to be watching. So I will go first. Like I said, my name is Courtney. This is Opus Eleni. I started out actually going to the local Renaissance Festival. And I know that's a very American thing. They're just kind of like summer fairs, but Renaissance themed, but very loosely. So you get a whole bunch of like fantastical elements. So you'll have like King Arthur, and then also fairies, or like Queen Elizabeth, and then also fairies, or Robin Hood, and also fairies. So, and mermaids. So I started off doing my local fair, which was a King Arthur fair. It was a medieval fair instead of a Renaissance one. I started working there, and then in college discovered the SCA and never looked back. So who would like to go next? All right. Faye, executive decision.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Faye. I am also in the SCA, but I mainly got my start when I was cosplaying in like baby middle school cosplay. And so then, like freshman year of high school, I joined the SCA for swords, and it all went downhill from here. And I am known for kind of living in my historical clothes.
Accurate.
Yeah.
The other day we were talking, and you were like, I wore normal clothes today. I'm like, Faye, that's a curdle. You were like, oh no, when I was at work, I was doing normal clothes.
Yeah,
like,
I shockingly wore jeans.
All right, who is next? I will make another executive decision if necessary.
I'll go.
Oh, go ahead.
Now we all want to go. Hi, I'm Daisy Victoria. I am Daisy Victoria everywhere. I'm really easy to find. I similarly went to Renaissance festivals when I was a kid, and I loved them. We did all kinds of other historical stuff too. My family is like a good stock of nerds. And so when I found out about the SCA, I was like, sign me right up. Like, let's do this. And I also have never looked back. I went straight in head first, and I like all the periods in the SCA basically. So I love all medieval stuff. I'm so excited.
Fantastic. Althea, thank you. I'm so glad you could join us. We're just going around kind of introducing ourselves and talking about like particular periods that we like and sort of what got us into doing historical costuming. So.
Hey, good morning. I'm Althea Rizzo. I live in Salem, Oregon in the US. I've costumed since I was very, very wee, but I've always been very much interested in history. And my degrees are in costume history. So I got my master's degree looking at the apparel of the frontier prostitute. And then my doctorate I did on the SCA, and I looked at the knight's regalia and how regalia is valued in our culture. So I have a deep history in the SCA. My specific focus is 6th and 7th century Merovingian. So I just posted a video yesterday on my Merovingian Arnagund outfit. And so that's me in a nutshell.
Fantastic.
I'm going to adjust my headband so I'm even.
we're going to talk later because I want to read both of those dissertations, please. Like, I would. Oh my goodness. All right, Ylva, you want to go?
Sure. All right. So I'm Ylva the Red on pretty much every platform you'll find me. I'm from Australia, one of the internationals on this panel. I started doing historical costuming in a very loose sense as a teenager, then got into HEMA, then transferred across into proper reenactment, and have a special focus on Viking Age. Specifically, my niche focus is the Irish Vikings, but I have a lot of interests across the board for Viking Age. Before I was in historical costuming, I was also a fashion designer of alternative fashion, so Gothic, steampunk, the leader, all that sort of stuff. So I had a lot of transferable skills when I got into reenactment. And yeah, so now my focus is pretty much just trying to piece together whatever scant evidence I can find for the Irish Vikings. Yeah, it's hard. It's hard.
For joining us in the middle of the night. Like, I want to fully recognize you stayed up like super late to join us, and I appreciate it.
3 a.m.
Yes, it's late.
All right, we've got a couple more people to go. Who's next?
I guess I'll say hi. I'm KZ, and I literally grew up in a theater and a museum and a gallery that has fiber arts. So it's kind of like always been there. The theater did mostly Victorian melodrama. So I guess it wasn't really a melodrama, but they were doing Dracula one time, and I was like 2, and my mom had the blood of children running down her front as Lucy. And like, this is just normal for me. In fact, the dress is over here.
Amazing.
So my grandmother studied fashion design at the Art Institute of Chicago, and my mom makes doll clothes. And so it's just kind of like always been there. And I still can't pick a period. Like, I'm all over the place. But I joined the SCA way back when, and there'll be years where I can't go, and then I'll like get 110% back into it, and it's just all over the place because life is chaos.
Fantastic. It's definitely interesting to see, like, growing up, what things are normal, you know, to somebody who is like, oh yeah, I grew up doing this, and people are like,
yeah, like I didn't even own a pair of pants until like my mom started giving me some last year. Like, other than I had some belly dance pants because like I wear dresses every day. Like, I wear costumes all of the time. It's what I do. So yeah, normal clothes is just unheard of.
Definitely overrated. Definitely.
All
right, Jimmy.
Hello, I'm Jimmy, and I am the Welsh Viking on the YouTubes. And I got into historical costuming because I was in a reenactment group when I was 18, and I did 17th century, and I figured I could do it better sewing it myself than spending 200 quid buying something that was badly made with the wrong patterns from 50 years after the period. And I was wrong because I'm very bad at hand sewing, but people helped me. And now I'm less bad at hand sewing. So that is nice. And now I make lots of things. And yeah, everything's fine. I'm in my mum's house. My mum says, "Ydych chi isio deud helo? Ti di deud helo? Ti di deud helo? Mae pawb yma."
Jimmy's mum.
Mae'n rhyw 60 o bobl sy'n watcha. Da ni'n live. Tid i mewn. Gosach. Mam.
Hi, Mom.
Hi. Helo pawb, sut da chi? Da chi'n iawn?
Pawb yn iawn.
A ni?
Nice. Go away.
Well, there is a dose of wholesomeness for the day. I hope everybody has a bit of insulin for themselves, because that was terribly sweet.
That was so sweet.
Yeah, Mam's here. She's made me a cup of tea, so I'm just here enjoying my cup of tea. But yeah, and now I'm in Regia Anglorum, and I'm in the SCA, and I've never been to a Renaissance fair, but I'm told they're really nice, so I wouldn't mind going to one at some point.
Well, you'll just have to come visit, and we'll take you to our local fair.
Exactly.
Yes, please.
And a lot of people also have a fascination with medieval times, like the event site, Medieval Times. I've gotten so many questions about it. I've only been once.
Are right. So I'm looking at all of the comments. Everybody loves your mom. Tell her she's very popular on the internets right now.
You're very popular on the internet at the minute. Everybody's saying hello to you.
Thanks, it's very sweet. So I just needed to say that. Okay, fantastic. So I figure I'll just ask a couple of questions that we had people write in beforehand, and then we will talk about see if there's any questions in the comments. Somebody did ask what you're sewing, Jimmy.
Oh, I'm sewing a new pair of brays. So I'm just making a big pair of linen medieval underpants, and they're bleached linen, so they're nice and fancy and posh.
Very posh.
I've needed a new pair for like 10 years, so it's time.
It's definitely time. I'm about to get into sewing a bunch more ships because I've legitimately worn through the fabric.
Yeah, totally. I have a couple of things where it's like I didn't know about seam finishing really when I started. So like I have some where like the gores are sort of separating from each other, and there's really no saving it at that point. I mean, I could take it apart and resew it, but who has time for that?
Yeah.
All right. So first question, we all live in really different places, different climates, although actually it's funny because three of us are still, we all live in the same state currently, but everyone else, how does where you live affect the way that you do medieval clothing? Do you make different fabric choices? Do you have a high like amount of historical fidelity? I will start. I live in Texas, and a lot of our events that we do down here tend to take place indoors when there is not a global panini on. So I have some things that I do that cater to the weather. I use a lot of linens instead of wool personally, because my temperature regulation is incredibly bad, and even very lightweight wools don't work for me. So that is my concession to where I live, but you know, your mileage may vary, I guess.
Yeah, and like in contrast, I also live in Texas, but since I grew up in Arizona and was also alt in Arizona, so I don't like showing my legs, so I wore like head to toe black, including black leather jackets in the middle of summer. So I have a very good way of regulating my temperature and heat, so I can wear multiple layers of wool, especially lightweight wools. And so I just go ahead. I like the feel of it a whole lot better than most other fabrics, and so that's what I end up doing. But I know that a lot of people can't, and like yesterday we were outside for 3 hours in 100-degree heat for court, and it was miserable even for me.
I'm the other Texas one. Oh, God. We'll just get Texas out of the way.
Yeah,
go for it.
So I didn't always live in Texas, but I've pretty much always lived where it's really hot. Like Florida is where I started in the SCA. It's kind of similar. It's very hot and humid. I lived out in LA for a long time where it's hotter but drier. So like I also don't regulate my temperature as well as I'd like to. So definitely the linens help me a lot, like getting down to thinner fabrics. Like sometimes it's the thickness of the linen and how many layers I'm wearing. Like if I can cut out a whole layer entirely and just fake it, like sometimes I'll have like false sleeves. So it looks like I'm wearing an underdress, but I'm not, because I would die. Other things is like actually the choice of what period I'm doing sometimes. So as I've gotten older, I seem to regulate temperature worse. And I've looked at earlier periods too. So sometimes I'll go back to like kind of pushing it on the medieval thing, but still okay for SCA, like with the Roman and Greek stuff, Egyptian. I've been into Minoan lately, like that kind of stuff. There's like fewer layers just inherently, and that helps a lot too. The other thing I do that's sneaky that I feel is probably more I get away with in Renaissance dresses, because there's a lot of places I can hide things, is wearing ice packs in my dress. Like I'll put them in strategic locations and I'll walk around. No one knows I have stuffed my dress with ice packs. super great. So that's an extra hack.
That's awesome. So I'm your neighbor. I live in New Mexico, but it's a lot drier here than it is in Texas. And where I am at night, it gets very cold, and during the day it can get very hot. And then if you're going to an event and you've never been to the location, it could be a big flat plain where there is absolutely no shade, or it could be, 12,000 feet up in the mountains. So I pack in layers because I have no idea what I'm getting into half the time. So you kind of just gotta play it by ear, and at night you put on a cloak over whatever you're wearing. And
absolutely. Let's see. It says +1 for ice packs under skirts. It works in California heat as well. So
yeah, that's where I picked it up, actually, in California. I can't see the chat. I feel like that might be my friend who said that.
It was V said that.
Oh, V. Yay. It's so good.
I'm from Wales and I live in Scotland, so I'm probably closest in terms of being in actual sort of medieval European climate most of the time, apart from the whole global warming thing. So, layer of linen in the summer. I usually just wear a layer of linen in the summer because you don't need much more than that. But if it gets a bit nippy, like a nice wool tunic over it, nice cloak, it can get down below freezing at night. So I've camped before in castles where I've had to have 2 wool tunics on over my linen tunic and my wool hose and 2 wool cloaks and a sleeping bag to keep warm. But that's a bit of a rarity. Get too old for that anyway. Don't do that anymore. Don't sleep on the ground anymore.
Not worth it. Not worth it.
It's not worth it. No, it's cold and hard and full of worms.
And Oregon is very much like Wales in temperature and climate. So, we dress in a lot of linen and wool and layers. And there have been many nights where I've had as many layers there. So, we dress in layers, we dress in wools, and that is really helpful. But I want to talk more about accessibility because of where I live and resources. So I study a period of history that isn't well documented in the research area. There's just not a lot of information out there. And the information is very narrowly banded on the very few extant pieces that are available. So being in Oregon, I can read the research, but there's nothing like going to a place and looking at the actual artifact. So I've actually been to France a couple of times to look at the artifacts, and that's been just really helpful because you can read online, but really seeing that the artifact has helped quite a bit for me.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. I know it's so hard sometimes to balance the accessibility of resources with desire for historical fidelity. And I think that the internet being more of a thing and more museums putting collections online has increased that amount of resources that are available to people, which is great. But you're right, there is nothing quite like, going somewhere and handling a thing and seeing how that material behaves even after so long. Ylva, did you want to talk any about that? And then after that,
yeah, costuming where I am is a bit tricky. So for those who don't know, I'm in Melbourne, which is in the southern part of Australia. Our events happen throughout the year. Some of them are public facing, some of them are private. So depending on which organizations you're with, you might have some that are in the middle of January, which is the peak of our summer. So you're looking at, 40 plus or 100 Fahrenheit plus events. And then there's also ones that are in the middle of our winter. On our Queen's birthday weekend, quite frequently, there's an event that's happened right in the mountains. It's freezing cold. Yeah, the amount of variation in our temperature ranges for events is quite significant. So we have to build our wardrobes to be very adaptable. So yeah, some summer events I am getting around in just a linen shift and maybe an apron dress if I can stomach it, although I am a little sensitive to the heat, so I don't always do that. Whereas yeah, at the winter events, I'm wearing 2 linen, 2 wool, apron dress, coat, probably a cloak, probably a hood. Like I am absolutely looking like the Michelin Man, just with my layers. I'm decked out depending on the event, and a lot of Victorians have that same sort of thing. But if you head north, you ask a Queenslander up the top end, a lot of their events happen just in the hot season. So they are looking at cutting out as many wool layers as possible. And that's across the board for all of Australia. Like where you are determines so much about how you're layering, because we're such a big continent. So it's a little hard to be specific about Australian costuming.
It's like, you're in an entire giant country that has, so many regional variations. I just don't understand.
We're almost the same size as the entire Northern American continent. Like it's massive climate variance across the whole country.
You're all vast. It's just wet and rainy here.
One of the things that always cracks me up, and this is like completely non sequitur, but one of the things that always cracks me up about talking to reenactors in Europe is the idea that we in Texas travel very far. Our kingdom is all of Oklahoma and all of Texas, and for reference, Texas is the size of France.
I think Aytonville has El Paso though.
Outlands do.
I wasn't going to get like that granular, but basically, half of our kingdom is the size of France. So we will routinely drive, 8-10 hours to an event that's still in our kingdom and still be in the same state. And that's, it's always funny to me watching like European reenactors' eyes get all wide after that.
If I drive for 8 hours in any direction, I will drown because I'll be in the sea. If I go 8 hours north, I will drown in the North Sea, and if I go 8 hours west, I'll drown in the Atlantic. So I've got choice.
See, if I want to do an event in Western Australia, I'm driving for at least 2 days.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah. The Outlands is like long and skinny, so it's like 12 hours is not unheard of. I usually don't go that far because my life won't let me, but they exist.
Definitely.
It's interesting when people talk about all the different layers and stuff, though, because I put a video up a few months ago where I was encouraging people to buy good wool and use nice wools and stuff, and loads of people were commenting like, "Oh, I'm sorry, but I live in Texas and I just cannot do that." And I'm like, okay.
Yeah. And you can. It does get cold here,
Yeah. Oh yeah. There was snow on the ground before one of the events that we typically go down to on Sayora. And so I packed a bunch of warm weather clothes, and then it's warmed up.
But it's fine. It's fine. Like if it's horrendously hot where you are, don't wear like I've got one of those. I've got a Viking style wrap jacket. I shouldn't say Viking. I've got a early medieval Scandinavian style wrap jacket, and it's 2 layers of wool with horsehair inside it. I never wear it. I don't wear it. I'm quite warm and I don't need it ever. But if it ever happens to be like below freezing in my tent or something, or somebody near me is really cold, give it to them.
Absolutely.
Days are never the same temperature for more than like 10 minutes usually here. So I think that's what there's no gatekeeping here. If you're allergic to wool as well, right? There are people who are allergic to it. Cool.
That
do that.
That is a wonderful segue, Jimmy. Thank you. Into our next question, which is shortcuts and what modern shortcuts or modern accommodations or disability accommodations do you make versus period techniques? Where is your line between historically accurate or high fidelity and time-saving machines and processes? For me, I know that changes. It really depends on the project and what my priorities are for each individual project. If I'm doing something that I'm going to be entering into a competition, then I'm going to try and get as high a historical fidelity as I can, just because that allows me to really explore and get granular in those techniques. But I make kirtles and I machine buttonhole them because sometimes I don't have time. I'm a single mom. I have a kid who's 10. I have a job that I have to do and an apartment I have to take care of, and a very demanding production assistant sometimes. And I just don't have the time to be able to do those sorts of things because I have to balance my modern life with the things that I'm doing. So my line changes depending on the project.
And buttonholes are the worst.
They are. I had to do 16 on a PowerPoint once, and I will admit that it took me 2 months because I just didn't want to do them. But
yeah.
I like to hand sew, and because of my back issues, I don't like sitting in chairs a whole bunch. So hand sewing works out easier for me because then I don't have to haul out the machine. I don't have to spend a day behind in a chair and end up needing pain meds or needing the next day to recover. So hand sewing works out really well for me, and that's the best way to accommodate. I also, of course, need my glasses, so I just work with them in whatever I'm doing. And then I hate buttonholes, so instead I can do like eight eyelets in a 20-minute section. So I do a bunch of eyelets instead of ever doing buttonholes. Because buttonholes are evil.
They are Satan's invention.
Buttonholes are what holds me back sometimes from finishing a project. I feel like I spend more time not wanting to do them than it takes to actually sew them. Yeah. I'm like, no, this is going to take forever. I don't want to do it. Whereas I could have just done it and finished it.
Mood.
And
my grandmother
if you do early period, you don't have to use buttonholes. You can do thread loops and use pins. So come to the early period.
Yeah, my grandmother hated fasteners so much that her entire fashion line only has buttons and button loops. That's it.
Brilliant.
Respect. I feel I'm highly privileged because in terms of my approach to costuming, I try not to make any concessions to modernity when I'm making my medieval kit. Like I try not to do anything differently to how it would have been done as close as possible in period. I try to get stitches to the right size. I try to make sure the thread counts are all as close as possible. I try to dye things naturally when I can, but that's because I'm relatively robust, fairly healthy physically, and I live in a temperate climate, and I've got the space in my life to do this at my own speed. Like I'm sewing these braids and that might take me a month, and that's fine because I'm not on a deadline, and that's totally cool. And that's why I tend not to do sort of project sew along videos like some of you guys do a lot more sewing content. And I don't sew at a speed where I can do that because I take my time over it because I'm doing the dumb thing and trying to make stuff like a Viking would make it because I'm an absolute masochist. But
though, it's just different priorities, and it's extremely valuable too, because if we don't have people doing that kind of granular level of experimental archaeology, then everything that we do is going to be influenced by our own modern biases, and that's not cool either. So I am a big fan of there being space in this hobby for everyone.
Oh yeah. But also my approach is partly academic and partly public facing. So a lot of what I'm doing is going into public facing reenactment and school visits and educational stuff. And I'm just sort of, I would feel bad if I went up to the public and they were asking, oh, wow, did you sew all that? That's amazing. How long did that take? And I'd be like, I whipped it up in 15 minutes on my sewing machine. It's fine. instead of being like, oh yes, these stitches are quite small, my thumb is now numb. But yeah,
Oh yeah.
that's just part of the fun of the hobby for me as well. I enjoy hand sewing.
Yeah, what I enjoy doing nowadays, now that I've got a bunch of the basic hand sewing stuff down, is I try to see how quickly I can replicate the time it took for an actual medieval needle worker. I've got my shift down to 20 hours of hand sewing work.
That's really
Very cool.
quick.
Yeah, and how accurate you can be, like you were saying, it varies so much. Like I have a goal of creating a historically accurate as possible 18th century it's Princess Peach cosplay, but like doing everything by hand. Like I just found a person who has wool and I'm going to learn to spin it and dye it and natural dye, like going 100% on that one. That one has no timeline. That one will be done when it is done, and it is what it is. On the other hand, when my kids were suddenly going to a week-long event, I took a modern shirt that fit me and sized it down for them, because you do what you have to do.
Kids grow so fast. Why?
That's one of the videos that I made that's coming out tonight, actually.
Everybody, go follow everybody. There will be links in the description as soon as we're done with this. I have that ready to go. And make sure you check out everybody's content for Cozy and stuff. Plug over, carry on. So talking about, we're talking about the different processes that we have and the different concessions that we make. What is a realistic timeline for everybody in terms of, either with shortcuts or without shortcuts? How long does it take you to finish a piece, and how quickly do you ramp up into production speed?
How soon is the next event? Because that really depends on how fast I sew. My sewing during the pandemic has been much slower, but we've all been there. We're driving to the event and we're hemming our garments, or we're hemming it sitting in court while we're wearing the garment. Yeah.
I feel so called out right now.
To be fair, I had a tunic that I emergency made for an event once that didn't get hemmed for like 3 events. So you're doing better if you're hemming in court.
I still have one like that. It's still there.
I mean, yesterday I called myself out with the tunic that is technically still held together with basting stitches that I fight in every week. But I give myself a month for every video, because I know I procrastinate. I have multiple days where I just can't get out of bed. And so, especially with also having 2 IRL jobs and school, it's the easiest if I just try to get one garment out a month.
That makes sense. For me, I have an upload schedule of every 2 weeks, but I try not to make it a project every 2 weeks because that's not sustainable for me personally. So I'll intersperse like a larger dress project with like, oh, I'm going to make myself a partlet. That's the next one I have coming out. And that's, so I have like larger projects and smaller projects and things like that.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, because in my life is absolute chaos. I literally have 2 hours a night that I can sew, and that includes like getting the machine set up, getting like anything that I need together, and my dogs are in here barking and like trying to distract me and things, and I can only do that like twice a week. So I have very minimal time to sew, and that's also time that I would edit a video and anything else. So that's why I try to just like not have deadlines as much as possible, because there's just no way.
I feel that a lot too. Part of my personal journey as my life adapts and changes over its stages is learning how to be kind to myself with deadlines. And I mean, it's at this point, like I have clothes to wear. Like if I had surprise go to an event tomorrow, I would have many options, right? Like I don't have to have a new thing. And like I can kind of play with what I'm going to put out in videos. Like, it doesn't have to be a specific structure. Like, I don't even know how many projects going at the same time. Like, there actually, this Minoan on the mannequin behind me has been sitting there for like weeks because I'm working on 3 other projects right now. And that's just how it goes. I just work on all of them and eventually they get done. And sometimes there's like a hyper focus stretch that kind of pushes one out. But, you know, other than that, it's really being kind to myself and making sure that I still love everything that I'm doing.
I'm in a sort of similar boat to you with the multiple projects thing going on, but for different reasons. So I also do the YouTube thing, though I haven't been doing it so much during the global panorama just because there's been a whole lot of other stuff offline. But I take commissions for historical clothing and dyes. I dye yarns, yes. Faye has a ball of my yarn halfway across the world. And so, you know, I'm constantly working on projects for other people as well. So like I juggle that workload as well as my own projects, as well as trying to be kind with myself, as well as, you know, trying to manage the household and all that other fun stuff. So yeah, the deadlines are dependent on, is it a commission? Is it for an event? Is it for me? Is it like, what is going on with it? And all of those things are adaptable. Like, everything changes. Because you never know, like, is a client going to say, hey, actually, I want this thing bumped up? Or is someone going to change their mind and that's going to mean that draws out longer? Or like, what's going on with it? Who knows? So deadlines are variable.
Yeah, they are. And this is just my reason to plug Ylva's shop because this wool is wonderful and I love working with it.
I love the pink that one came out too. Like, that was one of my favorite ones from that batch, was the pink. That's a madder dye and I love it.
It looks great and it's perfect for on Wednesdays we wear pink.
Oh, right?
Yep.
I can't wait to show you the one that's coming out of the pot. Like, I've got another madder batch in the pot right now on the stove. It's going to be on the stove for about 3 days. That one, yeah, you're going to love the color that one comes out, Faye.
Yes.
Might have to talk later.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
All right.
Yes, I'm also a dye nerd.
So next question. Well, actually, real quick, we did have a question from Chad. How many UFOs does everybody have?
No comment.
I don't know. Too many to count.
This is half.
Oh gosh.
So I've actually been very good about finishing my UFOs lately, but I still have 3 garments that are yet unfinished that were supposed to be fully hand sewn and out for April Fools. Whoops. I'm still working on the top stitching on one, and others need to be put together for tie-dye.
You can do them for April Fools next year.
Perfect. All right, so I have a couple. I don't have many. I tend to be one of those people who will like hyper focus on a project at hand until it's finished, which is really great for having a bi-weekly deadline, but is not great for when one of those deadlines does not get met. So my biggest UFO right now is the Sabriel surcoat that is still in progress. I am embroidering each one of these keys, which was a ridiculous decision, but I stand by it. So that's the biggest one. And then I have another couple that are like, oh, I still have yet to finish felling the seams or hemming it or something, but like they are done to the point where they are now wearable. So I don't have many.
I've got a few. I've got an 1830s waistcoat and trousers that Zach Pinson had to sew me into at an event a couple of years ago that still need to be separated and reworked, but I can't be bothered. And I've got a couple of bits and bobs I don't have many unfinished projects, but I've got things I need to repair that I can't be bothered. So I had an under tunic that was covered in holes from being left next to a campfire for about 2 years that I finally got around to patching. But nobody ever sees it because it gets worn underneath wool. So it doesn't really matter, but I'm bad at maintenance. But unfinished stuff is relatively rare because I will sit with a project and sort of get it done. Otherwise, I'll grump at myself and be upset. So I try to avoid that.
My biggest
mention. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. I was like feeling, I think, almost guilty to the strawberry dress I've been working on, thinking about unfinished projects, because I sewed most of it and the outer gown is wool and it got hot. Like I was going to finish it in the winter, but I didn't. And then it got hot. And now I'm like, nah, I don't want to sit with wool in my lap because I have hours and hours of hand sewing to do. So I'm like, we'll wait till it cools down. And like every time I see it, it's like, I need to be finished. Please finish me. And I'm like, no, not right now.
What I'm hearing is that we should have like a monthly finish along or something, you know, or have like a, you know, rolling Zoom call or something like that. And people can just drop into it and be like, you can't start a new project. You have to, this is only for finishing things or mending things today.
Yeah, that sounds like we need that.
That's a good
we
idea.
could turn the Saturday calls into that. You never know.
I'm gonna put a pin in that later.
Yeah, I'll pin that later.
Here later.
One of those 2 days where I can sew a night, I have to dedicate to just fixing and finishing, just to make progress, because this is ridiculous.
I mean, you will never run out of things to do, which is kind of nice, I guess. And
yeah,
this sort of way.
Well, your mention of hyperfocus reminds me of some conversation we've had recently with some friends. I have ADHD, so hyperfocus combined with inability to gauge time means that, notice I was late. So we have to give ourselves a certain amount of grace about our unfinished projects. A lot of times we can get so fixated on what we haven't accomplished that we don't notice what we have accomplished. So when people are starting to beat themselves up about what they haven't accomplished, go fondle something that you really love that you have finished, and just kind of turn that internal dialogue around.
It is meant to be fun, after all, isn't it?
it is meant to be fun.
If it's not fun, then have a break and go and watch a film or something.
Go look at other people's things. I get so inspired by, I know that there's like a whole rat race feeling around social media and feeling like you have to like keep up with the Joneses or anything like that. But I like to put myself into the mindset of getting inspired by people whose work I genuinely enjoy and find incredibly useful, both as a blueprint for how I want to do my work, and also just these are the beautiful things that can be created if we can find the joy in it and lean into that. So I love, you know, like if I'm feeling uninspired or frustrated, like I'll go on YouTube and, you know, put on, you know, one of Jimmy's videos or like one of Elon's videos, Elon Abramson, who's amazing, or I'll put on one of, you know, Daisy's videos, especially if I'm like frustrated with my medieval and Renaissance stuff. I'll be like, I want to watch a Pretty Fairy corset video now. And I will. And it's great. And it's invigorating. So I think it's really important that everybody remembers to refill your creative cup, because if you're pouring from it all the time, there will eventually be nothing left. Apparently it's Soapbox Sunday for Courtney.
Apparently, like I approach this hobby with like, I don't consider myself very creative. I'm more analytical, which is kind of why I stick to focusing on the research context around whatever I'm making in my videos, because design is not my thing. I am a data analyst to the day I die. It's why I'm in linguistics. And so I don't think like I'm pouring from a creative cup. I'm just looking at it as another way of analyzing the past.
Yeah, research is my hobby. I can't help it.
Yeah.
Someone will say something random to me about something they're interested in. Interesting, tell me more. Give me sources.
Yes. It's that stuff, which is why I now keep a commonplace book. So like I was talking to people who I really value for their research, and I was like, oh yeah, remind me of when that happened. And then I pulled out a thing. It was like this really interesting court case happened a couple years later regarding like the definition of nobility. And I was and yeah.
I love digging down rabbit holes and things, and I struggle with it just because it's like, I know that if I go and do the research, I will not come out of that rabbit hole, and it will be morning and my kids will be up and I'm going to be like, wait, what? Why are you up in the middle? Oh, wait. So I don't do as much research as I want to or should.
So I know that there are a lot of people on this call, and I know that this doesn't necessarily have anything to do with costuming, but I'm going to show you one of my accessibility things. I have a clock that if you turn it, it'll give you that amount on the timer. So when I feel like I need to research something or whatever, I will put like half an hour on my timer, and it just sits by my computer, and it lets me, even if I know that I have like 3 hours to do whatever I'm doing, setting the timer for every half hour allows me to keep that sense of time as I continue, which has been really valuable for me. So there's my.
Similar to that one, sprints. Sprints is another one that I use a lot, and not necessarily even with costuming friends. Like I have other friends that work from home and stuff like that at the moment, and it'll be just one of those things where someone's struggling to focus that day. All right, we're doing sprints. Yep. And that's how we keep track of time, and we keep on course and all that sort of stuff, and that's our tactic, and it works really well for us.
Yeah,
agree. All right, so kind of last question, and then we'll see if anybody in the comments has questions for us. How do you reconcile evidence and authenticity with your clothing? I know there are some people who go like full historical fidelity. If we don't have evidence for something that was worn in the same place at the exact same time, you don't wear it together. And then there are some people who are like, I literally have no evidence for what was worn here, but I'm going to go with what was worn over here as a plausible happenstance. So I just kind of want to get everybody's sort of personal take on evidence-based costuming and where you are with that.
So I do a lot of extrapolation, and I think maybe that's because like I am like that creative designer at heart too. And like, I don't want to just replicate something. Like even when I cosplay, I like to do an original take on things. That's what brings me joy. And that may be why like I tend to gravitate toward things that don't have as much research available. So it's like, I need to fill in the gaps. Like I need to see what I can find from surrounding regions, from other time periods, and see like what I can kind of piece together to fill it in. And at the same time, like I get to design a little bit, and I also get to play like research scientist in a way, like experiment, see what works. Oh, did this work? Yes, did this, but this one didn't work. Let's try something else. And for me, that experimentation is part of the fun of creating. So I'm definitely drawn to it.
Research, you say? Digging for evidence, you say? I'm trying to aim more towards that. I have friends who are in a couple of different early medieval societies who have done loads and loads of work trying to put together impressions based from a single grave. And that's sort of reenactment goals for me. And I haven't done that yet, but I am aiming to put together an impression that uses only accessories from sort of around a couple of miles from. I happen to be right now in a very artifact rich part of the world, so I can take 50 square mile island that's just over there and get all the accessories I need, including sort of weapons and belt fittings and stuff from that, and then use general Viking Age clothing stuff to fill in the soft kit. But I try to get as close as I can fidelity wise. You know, I try to do century by century for early medieval. So if I'm wearing something something based on an artifact or a fine or an impression from the 10th century, I'll try desperately not to have anything that's fairly identifiably 11th century Anglo-Saxon if I'm trying to be a 10th century Viking, just to try and just my own peace of mind, and because it's part of the hobby for me. I think it's interesting and fun to try and challenge myself in that way. But to other people, that would be migraine inducing. And I don't want everyone to feel like I want everybody to do that, because that would make lots of people very sad and turn them off the hobby completely. And that is the opposite of what you should do. So everyone be cool.
Yeah. I'm very similar. I like to make things hard for myself. So in the Viking Age, I picked the island of Gotland, which we have very little fiber evidence from. It's mostly the jewelry. And we have like one piece of cording that Ylva and I have looked over before.
Oh, but the jewelry though. Oh, but the
jewelry is gorgeous, and that's honestly why I chose the island. And I now have the copy of that has all of the grave finds of the island of Gotland, and there's one specific jewelry set or style that you only see in like one parish of Gotland, and I might narrow the window even further. And Courtney is just going, why do you do this to yourself, Faye?
So I love it. I did the same thing when I was in college. I have a fine arts degree. And so the higher up in level of classes that you have, the less people dictate, professors dictate your plan, right? You don't have like a syllabus that says you're going to do this number of paintings and they're going to be these techniques and these, so I would do the same thing. I would create, I did an entire semester in one of my water media classes where I was painting stuff that you would see under a microscope. So everything was these it doesn't matter, but I am here for self-imposing boundaries on your game. And I think that, what Jimmy was saying earlier about your own standards and practice not being anybody else's is really important, right? Like my game is my game and somebody else's game is somebody else's game. And I don't ever want anybody to feel like the standards that I hold myself to are what I'm going to hold somebody else to.
Yeah, man, if you want to, this is the thing, I've played with the SCA a few times before, and when I was sort of introduced to the SCA, I was warned, you're going to see people wearing cotton trousers but doing a Viking impression. Don't freak out. And I'm not going to freak out. You don't have authenticity guidelines, and I'm part of a society that has a 50-page book of rules on authenticity and fiber mixing and colors that people should be using. Get off him!
Were you just giving your big hand to the cat?
Yeah, this is Byron. But if that's not your jam, that's not your jam. That's totally fine. I'm not going to dictate that it has to be your jam. So just be cool. Meow.
Be cool like a cat.
He's covered my brazen hair now, so thank you so much.
Cats back then, so that's authentic.
Yeah, and also imagine being around cats and not having everything you own covered in fur.
Impossible. He's also a Norwegian forest cat, so it's fully authentic.
Of course your cat's authentic. Of course.
Anyone else?
I know, Althea, you were talking earlier about doing Merovingian and not having a lot of evidence. How do you reconcile those things?
So what I do is there are a few pieces that I use as sort of guideposts, but I also look at Anglo-Saxon, because there was a lot of trade in goods and people moving back and forth between Francia and the English areas. But I also look at Byzantium at the same time. because there was a lot of influence across there. So it's a lot of looking at contiguous areas and pulling it together. There's one existing sleeve from this time period. And so I've kind of used that sleeve as a starting point for some of my tunics. So it's just really looking at all the various pieces and figuring out what wouldn't be there. So they wouldn't have gore, I mean, they wouldn't have darts, they wouldn't have princess seams. A lot of my period is just a rectangle and maybe a triangle.
Geometric
and so
cutting.
It makes it really easy for patterning. But it's just, you know, looking at like the Stuttgart Psalter, if I'm doing later period, there's some other manuscripts that I can look at for ideas, but it's just, like you said, a lot of extrapolation because we don't have a lot of very full garments.
And some of those early manuscripts are so stylized, you know, you don't do any kind of realism in illustrative art until much later, you know.
Yeah. It's so difficult. It's so hard when you get people have to extrapolate what they can from what they have, but when your only option is the Bayer tapestry, you're like, oh, okay, but
right? Or runestones, like how
runestones, yeah, like
I'm
pretty sure there wasn't just a guy with his genitals out crouching in the Battle of Hastings, but he's there, so what you gonna do? Like
when you gotta go, you gotta go.
Phoenixes, cool, I'll just go and get one.
And Ylva, I know you also talk about this a lot with your Hiberno-Norse stuff on your channel.
Yeah, because the textile evidence particularly is very scant or hard to get access to for my particular niche interests there. So like with your Merovingian stuff and things like that, looking at the trade routes is really important, and looking at where the Hiberno-Norse culture came from. So like we know a lot of the Scandinavians came across to Ireland from Norway, so I can look at Norwegian styles, which leads me to a lot of very geometric cuts and stuff like that. But I know also that I can't look at things like Hedeby, which even though it has more creative, you know, cuts in fabric and stylings and stuff like that, it's not appropriate for me to apply to a Hiberno-Norse culture because there's no connection there. Nothing that I can see that really lends itself to something like Hedeby or Birka or Gotland, or like there's so much that I can cut out because there's no connection there. But also being so close to York and knowing York's a trade centre and that there was commerce there, like I can look at York, but I also have to be careful with York because there's a lot of, you know, early Anglo influence there as well. So like, it's a bit of a tricky one. For me personally, I do look as close to the textiles that are found, like the Fishamble Street excavations and stuff like that. Like, I could get access to more reports of actual excavations, I would love it. But it's hard to get our hands on. So yeah, it's one of those things where I have to make some educated guesses and some extrapolations there. But, you know, for me also context is important. That's good for my own personal impressions. But like I said, I do stuff for clients. So it's a matter of what are they willing to go through? Like I can give them as much information as I can get my hands on, and they could completely ignore it all and say, I'm doing this Birka impression, but I want it to look like a Rus. I can't really tell the client that they're an idiot, even if I think they're an idiot. That's what they want. That's what they want.
That all kind of goes back to, you know, the standards that you would have for yourself in your own kit are not necessarily the priorities that other people have, you know. And
that's the thing. I just have to kind of go, yeah, you know what?
That silhouette,
it's not me. I don't have to wear it.
You're correct. That's a cool silhouette.
That's partly why I don't do commissions. Mostly I don't do commissions because my sewing's not good enough. But also I don't do commissions because I don't want to do this for that reason, because the joy I find in historical costuming is part of the joy of researching and from my archaeological background. So the idea of sewing clothing for somebody else, because that's my job, fills me with absolute dread. But like,
oh, see, I've got
also
a weird
it would suck because I'm bad at sewing.
I really love the research, don't get me wrong, and for my own stuff and for the people close to me, I love the deep dive researches and I love going for the high accuracy and stuff like that. But I also love the making. And so even if I don't agree with a client's decision on what they want made, making it is still fun, you know, like even if that client wants Rus stuff, I'll go to town on that Rus stuff and I'll make that Rus stuff as good as I can, even if they're going to say they're wearing it with a burqa impression. You know what? Because I don't have to wear it, but I can enjoy the process of making it. And that for me is amazing.
And you can judge them silently afterwards and nobody knows the difference.
I can also enjoy watching them wear it at events, you know, because they're getting enjoyment out of a thing.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean? Like there's still that element as well that I really enjoy.
I agree.
I come at it in a kind of a different way. Like, because I don't pick a specific period to like totally go 110 into, I tend to like just pick and choose, like, you know, I have a problem and, well, you know, let's find a solution. And I'm not smarter than these people were, so let's see how they solve the problem. And so I'll pull a solution from one culture here and another culture from there and kind of mash it all together, which drives some people insane, but it's just part of my process and the problem solving for me. So.
And that can still work even with the sort of work that I do. Like, even if I am highly in depth in what I'm doing, like I said, the textile evidence for the Irish Vikings, it's really hard to say anything certainly. So you do have to pull from other stuff. You do have to find solutions elsewhere. It's a perfectly valid way to go about things.
Yep. Because you have to sometimes, right? There's no choice.
You have to.
Otherwise, you don't get to. You get a silk cap. Okay, bye. That's it. That's all you get to wear if you're going to just take.
Now that sounds like an interesting event.
Because we've got finds in Dublin of like a silk cap and some shoes. Where's everything from in between? Like, you can't go to
it's all
Dublin
fragmentary. Like, I don't fancy going around in fragments of fabric. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
you got to go somewhere else. Like,
technically, you do have head to toe for Dublin.
Just nothing in between. Nothing.
Yeah. You've connected the dots. You haven't connected shit.
You don't get full coverage, but you get some coverage.
You're just bio tapestry. You're that guy in the background. That's all. That's all.
Yeah. Oh, he's not in the background.
I also think that it's definitely worth keeping in mind that even with dedication to a high historical fidelity, there is not, like, we cannot achieve the same level of accuracy. It's impossible. Not just because of not having enough resources to be able to say definitively how apron dresses were cut below, the chest, right? But also because the breeds of sheep that we have are no longer the same. Our industrial cleaning and processing of wool is not the same. Even linen production, the kinds of linen that we have modernly and the ways that the linen is processed and spun and woven, those are all different. So even if you try to get the highest fidelity possible, which is to say raising your own sheep and doing all of your own processing and all of your own spinning and all of your own everything, even if you want to get that granular, that sheep is not going to be the same. The water that you process the sheep wool in is not going to be the same. Like, it's impossible. And so just remembering to cut yourself that amount of slack is important.
I kind of think of historical accuracy as like it's a scale, and at one end is modern clothes and at the other end is absolute historical accuracy, which is like an infinite line. And there's all these kind of little catches that's like, okay, well, there's this hurdle that you need to overcome. And then further along, there's another hurdle that you need to overcome. And they just keep getting harder and harder as you go further and further into historical accuracy.
The speed of history.
Yeah, and those hurdles, sorry.
No,
I was
good.
just going to say those hurdles are also contextual. I mean, here in Australia, I can't import the lichen to dye my clothes as would have been done by the Hiberno-Norse.
Yep.
I have to make do with synthetic things. So my location itself is a hurdle I would have to overcome. It's not feasible for a lot of people to do those sorts of things. So like we just have to do the best we can.
Yeah, it's like the people in Texas who were commenting on my video being like, I'm really sorry, I can't use wool, I've let you down. Like, no. You're doing your best. No one here is judging you. Everyone here loves you and wants you to be happy in your hobby. Just
Absolutely.
Yeah.
no.
Do your best, get as close as you can or you want.
Well, yeah, get as close as you want, right? Because nobody should be judging you ever. I mean,
That's it.
unless you're a racist, in which case everybody should hate you. But
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And to kind of riff off of your inability to import the lichens, I have a friend up in British Columbia that is doing a lot of her recent work with locally available lichens and plant materials. And she's working with some of the indigenous groups to kind of recreate their own processes and learn from them. So you can sometimes achieve those same colors with locally produced things. And I think that if you explain that, in period, it would have been used by this lichen and this plant, and I use this mordant and that kind of thing, but this is what I have available, and this is the mordant that I used, and to achieve the same color, I think that there's a lot of really fascinating information and work that you can do with that.
That's another
100%.
It's kind of another idea of historical accuracy is like, well, what would these people have done if they lived in a different place? Just another way to think about it.
Definitely. All right, I'm going to open it up real quick. We have been here for an hour chatting, and I could definitely go for like another 3, but I want to open it up to the chat and see if we have any questions from anyone in the comments. I figure we'll go for about another 10 minutes or so and then hop off. Ronnie says, what is your favorite memory from early period costuming?
Oh, probably my very first event, making the transition from HEMA to reenactment. I was given 2 weeks notice before my first reenactment event. So I had no actual historical garments and had to get through 3 days on whatever I could make. And my boss at the time was incredibly lenient and allowed me to hand stitch at the front counter of our shop. So in the 2 weeks, we blitzed it and actually got something kind of wearable. And I still, after 6 years, have those original garments, but I will never be caught dead in them again.
I have some, like, probably because I haven't been at events recently. My most recent awesome early period memory is from when I was doing the Wanderer shoot, because I went to this local lake. It was a beautiful hike, and I got to be in both my feminine and my masculine impressions, and swimming in that lake in the middle of January was so good. It felt great. It was so warm outside, and so I just kind of hopped in the water, and it was wonderful. Unfortunately, my shirt got too sheer, and so I did not include that footage in the video.
Probably best.
Yes.
All right, so Lydia's Secret Sewage asks, I was wondering if you guys have thoughts on period color schemes. How did they think about what kind of furs to pair with their pink wool, and was color harmonizing ever a thought? I feel like we can just defer to Ylva on this one.
Yes.
Well, if we look at the evidence, the evidence that I have so far read, and I definitely hunt for the textile dye analyses in the reports. The dye analyses only tell us what dye stuffs were used. So we know madder, we know woad, we know lichen, we know that there was weld, we know that there was another yellow that we still haven't quite identified. What does that mean in terms of a spectrum?
yes.
So all of these are madder, all of them. What does that mean? Anything goes if you can achieve it with that. We've got a whole bunch of different yellows. You've got things that shouldn't achieve yellow that do. You know, there's a whole host of things. Did colors match? Probably not. But in my personal experience, if you can achieve it with natural dyes, it probably doesn't clash that badly. Bright is beautiful in my opinion. I love all of the big bright colors, but they were probably also richer colors, possibly cost you more because they take more dye stuff, take longer to do. But still have fun with your colors. Just go for it. And brown is beautiful.
A symphony of browns is never wrong. I've recently, who have I recently followed? Somebody on Instagram I've recently followed who's just done a full attempt at the Skjoldham outfit, and it's just this wonderful symphony of browns that they've made, and it just looks awesome. Like, it looks great. It's not an accurate reconstruction of the colors, because obviously it doesn't have all of the lovely blues and reds and things in the finger loop braid, but it just looks lovely. Like, it's all really just nice, subtly muted
browns
natural
can be
browns.
absolutely glorious.
So nice.
We don't appreciate brown enough.
I love browns. I love browns.
I think
love
my common impression is full of browns.
Yeah.
This is
Same.
like my higher status, but yeah,
Brown.
my common impression is full of brown.
Browns, a little bit of pink. That's my usual.
A little bit of like pale pink, yeah.
Pale pink, yeah. Oof,
Yeah.
oof.
Love it.
And it is madder as well, because
I think
Yes.
Hollywood impression of like middle-aged peasantry, you know, because everybody is just mud. Everybody is mud in Hollywood when they're doing like middle-aged stuff. So like this idea of like, you know, they had more colors, like obviously these colors were achievable and we should embrace that, and that's awesome. But also mud did exist.
But like there is a spectrum of browns too. Like it's not just mud brown, it is a spectrum. And it is glorious.
All right. So we have a lot of questions. I'm gonna skip most of them, unfortunately, but I want to, for our last question, what pop culture medieval item would you love to translate into something accurate? So Witcher, Princess Bride, Danielle's Dress from Ever After. What is everybody's like dream? I want to make this, but fidelic.
Lots of them.
I know mine.
Yeah, I can't pick just one.
Yeah, I'm gonna be working on Merida soon, so like that's an upcoming one. I just did Cruella, but I placed her in the Middle Ages. Like, she's not canon Middle Ages. There's so many. Like, mentioning the Princess Bride, like I was just thinking about that the other day. Like, everything I want to make. I'm really into transitioning like the pop culture things into historical. I think that's kind of like who I am.
So I've already done a video where I talked about like what I could do to make the costumes of one of the series that got me into the Viking Age, The Last Kingdom, into something that's more historical. And so I could obviously have that very obvious option that I've already done redesigns for. Or I could talk about what got me into more 14th century things, which is Tamora Pierce. And I would really love to do something with either Becca Cooper, who has the cat that is the namesake for My Little Void, or Caladori of Mindelan in a more 14th century look.
I have wanted for a while to do a good King Arthur, because every single King Arthur sucks, and I will fight anyone who wants to on that, but every single one of them looks like steaming hot garbage, or a Robin Hood, because all of the Robin Hoods are garbage, and the last one was insultingly bad. So I would like to do either a King Arthur or a Robin Hood, but as fully period accurate as humanly possible, because they would still look amazing and everyone would still love them and everyone would be like, oh my god, that looks awesome, and I'd be like, yeah, Hollywood, have some of that. Wool is great.
Yeah, I was going to mention Robin Hood Prince in Tights. Either that or the Black Kettle.
do that.
Like I said, I'm doing Princess Peach 18th century, but it's supposed to be actually a family cosplay. So my kids are gonna be Mario and Luigi as like kind of piratey. And I had designed for my husband, who is now my ex, a Bowser in a Georgian frock coat. So I don't know how that one's ever gonna come to be, but it like that's the one I'm focused on right now. But there's so many others.
All right, so I'm going to geek out for 1 second because this has been a long-term passion project of mine, and I am trying to find the fabrics for it. It is going to happen. The 1968 Franco Zeffirelli Romeo and Juliet, I want her ballroom scene dress. That one done historically accurate because it is beautiful and it is so close. Like they missed the mark just a little bit, but it is so close to good. So I want that one.
Agree. Gosh, I didn't even think about that one. Oh man, that's so good. I have a couple of things that are upcoming or planned. I too love King Arthur. My name in the SCA actually comes from one of the King Arthur books that I read. It's The Crystal Cave by Mary Stewart, which is my very favorite retelling of King Arthur.
I knew that's where your name came from. I knew that was where it was from.
Tells the story of Maxon and Ellen is my name, which is why my channel's name is Opus Eleni. Anyway, so I want to do, at my Renaissance Festival when I was young, we did an ongoing storyline. And one of the things that we did was the Saxon invasion of, King Arthur. And so I'm going to do a remake of the Saxon outfit that I wore at the Renaissance Festival. So but accurate. And then the other one that I'm doing that will be out in October for the return of, for Halloween and also the return of The Mandalorian is I made my partner a Boba Fett medieval tunic. And he loves it. And he's he just took it and wore it out to an Amp-Guard event, which is a LARP. And he had to fight people off because they were like, I will roll you in a back alley for this tunic. And I was like, my work here is done. So the video for that will be out in October. Everyone can look forward to that. I'm very proud of it. But we are actually 15, 20 minutes over what we had kind of scheduled. So I want to say thank you to everyone for joining me today. I really appreciate this panel has been wonderful. Everybody in the comments has been great. This panel will remain up on my channel and definitely I'm not going to take any of the panels down or anything like that. So if you missed it, no worries. Also in the description will be everybody's information, YouTube, Instagram. If anybody else has other links that they would like me to put in, make sure you DM me and I'll put them in there. Go follow everybody. Go see all of the other COSI stuff. Thank you all so much. I appreciate you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
And I'm going to be obnoxious again and plug Ylva's shop because the wool is wonderful.
Oh my goodness. In 40 minutes, I am going to be taking part in Daisy's channel. On Daisy's channel is the Renaissance costuming panel. And I will be there and a couple of other people. So we'll have a little bit of crossover in 40 minutes over on Daisy Victoria's channel. Join us there.
Slide into the comments.
Part 2 of periods.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you, everybody. Mwah.